Hey everybody, this is Bill Payne from Little Feat with John Broughton on Retrospectives on 3 SER, KC Radio.
When you formed the band in 1970, was there a set plan or blueprint of the sound that you were after for them?
Not really. The actual blueprint of the sound sort of was manufactured as we went along. In fact, in 1969 was when summer of 69 was when we formed the band. Lowell George was just gotten off a tour in Europe, or with Frank Zappa, or was asked not to go on a tour, I should say. And it was basically because he'd written a song called Willin', and Frank thought it was a good song, but didn't like the lyrics with the drug intent. So he says, well, maybe you better do your own band, Lowell. So, and I happened to be calling Frank Zappa from up Santa Barbara myself to see if I could join their band. And I was sleeping on the beach at the time up in the Isla Vista area of Santa Barbara. At any rate, the one thing we wound up doing, sound aside, when Lowell and I did speak, I was hooked up through a secretary at Bizarre Records who said I should meet Lowell George. That Frank was over in Europe, and I said, okay, well, I'll talk with Lowell. And we were discussing the kind of band we were looking for, and basically we were looking for something that would be influential within the musical community, that we would be open to working with a lot of different people over the years, and write unusual, or at least music that was that you could only play in our band. And we have pretty much done all of that. So it was one of those unusual situations where we actually did form a goal in some circuitous way. It sort of worked out that way.
Were you quite conscious at the time of trying to create a sound that was a little bit different to what else was coming out of California at the time?
Well, we were, like I said, I wanted to join Frank Zappa's band, so Frank's band certainly didn't sound like anybody else. We had our own kind of backgrounds musically, country, jazz. We decided to just throw all those things into the pot, show tunes, and see what came out. And there's people who have heard the first album called Little Feat, which was released, I think, in 1970 on Warner Brothers. It's an extremely eclectic album. I mean, it has everything from Gunboat Willie, which is almost like a show tune in a way, or cartoon music. Strawberry Flats, which is a combination of sort of a country song and some sort of rock and roll, miscast rock and roll beat over country music. Truck Stop Girl, which was, in fact, a country song that we'd written. Brides of Jesus, which I still, to this date, cannot define what that tune is. And Got No Shadow, which is kind of a rock and roll song. It sounds a lot like what the kids are playing today, to tell you the truth. And it was just this amalgamation of styles and music, and piled up upon one another. We were conscious of trying to not so much create something different, but just do it in our own voice. We were trying to find our own voice, and we sounded a little like the band at times. I sounded a little like Leon Russell, an imitator at times, and Lowell's original version of Willin' was, I guess, the imitation of an old truck driver singing the song.
Yeah.
Unlike the version that came out on Sailing Shoes. The two elements I also want to mention are Richie Hayward, who we got from a band called the Fraternity of Man, who had a song called Don't Bogart That Joint, which became popular and was exploited in the movie Easy Rider with Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda, which became at least an American cult movie of the 60s. And that was a prominent song in that. Richie was with that band. Elliot Ingber was also in that group. Elliot was one of the original guitar players of the Mothers of Invention. So you can see Frank's band sort of intertwines with our group quite a bit. In fact, which leads me to Roy Estrada, who at the tail end of 1969 we got into our band. Roy was the original bassist of the Mothers and played on virtually every album up past Uncle Meat and Weasels Rip My Flesh, those sort of records. But he did Help I'm a Rock and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he's a part of musical history of the early Frank Zappa records. He was our first bass player. And we proceeded to do 2 albums with Roy Estrada, Little Feat and Sailin' Shoes, which has become somewhat of an icon of that generation of albums. I should probably mention Neon Park very quickly in that Neon Park did every one of our album covers up until with the exception of the very first one. So he did Sailin' Shoes with us. And Rolling Stone magazine a couple of years ago or a year ago had the top 100 album covers of the last few decades, I guess, and Neon's Sailin' Shoes and Weasels Rip My Flesh, which was a Mother's album, were both on that list.
How did the initial deal with Warner's come about? Because I believe Frank Zappa did want you for the Bizarre label, didn't he?
Well, Warner's was, I'm not exactly sure. I think Herbie Cohen, who was Frank's manager, tried to help us out briefly, but that never really happened. I think Frank passed on us with Bizarre. He also had a thing called Straight Label. They were both connected through Warner Brothers. So by a series of hooks and crooks, Lowell and I went out to visit Ted Templeman, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, and Liddy Warnaker, who later became president of the label. And at that point was just basically a A&R and producer at the label. We played 9 songs at Liddy's office, had a piano in it, just Lowell and I, and they listened to them and said, yeah, that sounds great, you got a deal. And that's basically how it happened.
Uh-huh. You remember the band's first gig?
I remember, let's put it this way. I remember the band's first gig on tour, which was at a place called the Reflections Club in Cincinnati, Ohio. Technically, it was on Christmas, December 25th. It was 1970. It was freezing cold. I, being from California, was not used to the snow or anything resembling cold weather, and thought that Cincinnati looked a lot like Russia. And I will tell you that I wrote down my impressions of the Cincinnati airport, which years later became the impetus for a song called Oh Atlanta. But getting back to the Reflections Club, it held about 1,000 people. We played 2 nights. It was packed both nights. And it could have been somebody up on stage sweeping glass for all those people cared. They were there to sing Ohio football songs. I know in Australia that your version of football is extremely popular. And indeed, I've watched a few Melbourne teams win the championship down there, so I know how crazy it can get there. Same thing over here with American football. And these people are out in the club, they're singing. They could have cared less who we were. So the second night, Richie Hayward gets up on stage, our drummer. He takes a sausage out of his pants, goes up to the mic, introduces the band, cuts off the head of the sausage, eats it, walks back to the drums. There was no reaction whatsoever from the audience. But Craig Fuller was in the audience, who joined us, I don't know, some 18 years later. There was Craig Schertz, who was our one of our mixers, about 18 years later, and 2 or 3 other people in the audience that apparently thought that were rather close to the band in one way or another on a business sense, or actually joined in the group. So it was a pretty wild evening when you think of those type of connections.
Yeah, nice to remember.
Yeah.
It's been said that the record company push for the band wasn't all that substantial in your early days. Was that a bone of contention at the time?
It was, and it still is to this day. We are the type of band then and now that doesn't necessarily put out hits when we record records. It's at least we have that thread carrying through, I guess. We in fact sold, I think, 11,000 copies of Little Feat. We sold 13,000 copies of Sailing Shoes. And but to Warner Brothers' credit, going back to the old days, they kept us on. They kept Little Feat, Bonnie Raitt, Van Dyke Parks, Randy Newman, and Van Dyke Parks. And I got to say that the idea of allowing artists of the nature that I just mentioned, which were, at least Bonnie at that point was not a hit artist or even close to it, but they nurtured the idea of developing artists, which is sort of a lost cause these days.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, we thought we should have been treated better, but even at that time, I think we were smart enough or sensitive to know that we were with a rather extraordinary company, which was headed by Mo Austin, who is currently working, I think, at DreamWorks, which is a Spielberg company, along with Lenny Waronker on the music side of things. And those are two people of a dying breed in this industry, which are people that are that actually understand music. So we were very fortunate to be with a label like that. But yeah, it was. I'm not sure they really knew what to do with us, but but they at least let us make records.
It was a few albums in before the songwriting load began to get spread around a bit. Did it take that time for you, for the others to gain confidence in themselves as songwriters?
I think that it did, and it's a process which still does, believe it or not. That time when you're either not touring or you're manufacturing ideas and direction is probably one of the most unusual stories about Little Feat there is. You have to remember that with a 6 or 7 year hiatus, this band has been together since 1969, and it's quite a feat itself.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, can I take just a quick break in the action to answer a quick call?
Yeah, certainly.
1 second. The longevity of this band, I mean, based, I think, on your question, which was the songwriting and our confidence in those little interims, we've always taken the direction of songwriting really seriously, and we've really not in any concerted effort worried too much about whether what we were writing was commercial. We've looked at the platform that Little Feat writes from as a unique place of being able to do within this band what you couldn't do anywhere else. And getting back to the original goal that Lowell and I had, which was being in a group that was influential in the musical community, I can tell you that some of the bands we've either influenced or they've said that they really liked us and liked what we were doing. Or everybody from the Rolling Stones to oddly enough, Elton John. I guess I was one of his favorite keyboard players for a while. The Grateful Dead, Led Zeppelin had some very kind things and words to say about us over the years. And with the newer bands, there's a group in the United States called Fish, which is purported to have some influence from us. There's the Blues Travelers, and country people from Garth Brooks to Emmylou Harris. I mean, it's just we've really kind of done what we put out and said we would do at that point. And we still work a lot, and are writing. That standard is still held very high, but I'm getting way ahead of myself in the story here. But I thought I'd mention that aspect of I think if we were aware of anything, it's maybe our place in history as a rock and roll band, and it's mainly on the influential side. And our fans are absolutely a huge component of this, which I'll get into a little later as well.
Cool. Now, am I right in saying there was a brief split in the band in the early 70s there as well, where you left?
The brief split occurred, I think, around in 74, maybe 75 even.
What was the main contributing factor there?
I think it had to do with drugs and craziness of that nature, and an inability to focus on what it was we wanted to do. It was also financial, which might have been even a huger contributor, because we just had come to the end of our rope in terms of being able to stay alive as a group, and the frustration that occurred out of that. Well, what we did was we decided at one point, Lowell and I were thinking about getting in a band with John Sebastian and I think it was Phil Everly.
That's right. Yeah.
Somebody had a brainstorm to put that together.
Was that ever close to coming to fruition?
It was closer than I would have liked it to have been. Yeah. I think Phil's wife said, "Look, what are you doing? This is not going to happen," and the whole thing shut down, which was great. I was not a big fan of it, to be quite honest, but I thought, along survival methods, whatever we had to do to carry forth for a while, then we'd reconvene.
Yeah,
was the honest thought. So basically, what happened was Lowell went down to New Orleans. He met Alan Toussaint. He did an album with Robert Palmer called Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley, in which a lot of people thought that was Little Feat. And I talked to somebody the other day, asked if it was Little Feat playing on that record. I said, no, it's the Meters. And then I went out with Bonnie, well, actually with the Doobie Brothers first. I was on a tour called What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits, and was out with those guys for a couple of weeks, and just thought, oh man, this is too much fun. I got into a lot of trouble out there and was physically losing it. So I opted to go out with Bonnie Raitt for about a month and play with her. And at the tail end of that, there was a plan afoot from a fellow named Robert Cavallo, or Bob Cavallo, who is a manager, oddly enough associated with John Sebastian in a group called the Lovin' Spoonful, and a partner of his, Joe Ruffalo. And they had an idea to put us into a studio in Maryland to do an album. And we thought, well, this is sort of weird, but we'll check it out. And they arranged everything. It was the owner was a guy named Steve Boone, who played with the Lovin' Spoonful, and there's the connection to John Sebastian. And we thought, well, all right, we'll give this thing a shot. So we reformed, and the album was Feet Don't Fail Me Now. And although in our chronological order here, we left out the album Dixie Chicken, it was safe to say that Dixie Chicken put us on the map on a certain level. It exited one player, Roy Estrada, entered two other players, or three actually, Paul Barrera on guitar, Sam Clayton on congas, and Kenny Garadney on bass. Kenny and Sam having come from the band Delaney and Bonnie. Paul Barrera from a garage group called the Lead Enema. So, but here we all are in the outskirts of Baltimore, Towson, Maryland, and summer of 75, I guess, in that area, or maybe 74. And we make yet another landmark album, which is Feet Don't Fail Me Now, and it has the song All Atlanta. It has a new version of Tri-Face Boogie, which we'd put on Sailing Shoes, I believe. And that was an indication that this band was not afraid to re-record songs. And it's more of a traditional jazz tradition than anything else, because you'll see a lot of jazz albums that have songs that are done and redone. And Little Feat has taken that sort of thing under its wing, although Willin' was the first song we did that with. But we did it again on musical value. We thought if we progressed to a point that something was much better than what we recorded before and had fresh life to it, that people should hear that. But that was indeed a breakthrough for us on a lot of levels. We met George Massenburg, who even today is one of the eminent acoustical scientists around, but he's also a wonderful engineer and a great person. He flew in from France. He was from Baltimore, but he was over working in a studio called Barclay in France, Paris, to work with us. So that association was cemented. We worked on a Robert Palmer album. I cannot remember the name of it, but it's got this girl with long hair and high heels and nothing else on, facing a view of some kind with Robert with a sly grin on his face. And so we met and worked with Robert Palmer. Emmylou Harris came to the studio, who lived in the area, and she brought in Frances Tate, who I later married, and you know, that's the history from that end.
Sure. Would you say it was around this time then you felt the band was really starting to come of age music?
I did. I thought it was. I think Cavallo in particular had a great idea of putting us together there. I should also add that Lowell George and Liz, his wife, Liz gave birth to Inara George, who is a wonderful human being and actually a really good singer, who is currently singing on a tribute album, which at this point is available in Japan as an import, and will hopefully be available in the United States this coming February, and I'm not sure what the plan is in Australia, but Inara had performed a track with Van Dyke Parks, which came off beautifully, and it's a song called Trouble. That song also exists in a form with Little Feat, and it is in outer space. NASA put some music of various kinds up to orbit to send out into outer space as a way to let whoever is out there know what we're doing. And we recorded Trouble with Inara and Little Feat. So it's out there in the heavens somewhere.
Floating around, yeah.
Floating around. It's on the major walkabout, I guess.
Now, towards the end of your time with Lowell, his contribution to the band appeared to diminish to a degree. Did you feel this putting extra pressure on the rest of you to keep it all together?
Very good question. And John, basically what happened was Lowell was in some serious health problems, which we were, I guess the age we weren't really thinking of that too much. I mean, he had like a spinal tap, and there was a bunch of medical procedures he was going through. And he'd asked Paul and I to get more involved. Well, when we did, I think on one level it pleased him, and on another level, because he did have this thing about, he loved the band, but he also didn't like the band. He, I guess, in private, had commented many times that the band was sort of a thorn. He wished he'd never called it a band. He would have liked to have done it probably more in the spirit that Bob Seger or Bruce Hornsby or Bruce Springsteen or a number of people like that had bands. You know, it's so-and-so in the band.
Uh-huh.
And basically, that's not a band at all. It's I mean, it is, but if the head guy, Springsteen or Seeger or whomever, doesn't want to do it, good luck to the other 4 or 5 members that want to go out and try and do it. It's the odds are it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, we never did that, and hence what took place was an album called Time Loves a Hero. That album is still hotly debated amongst feet aficionados as being a major shift in the group away from Lowell. And that Paul and I had sort of taken over the band, which is not entirely true. And what I've pointed out to people, that a few years later when Lowell put out Thanks I'll Eat It Here, which is his solo album, I said, well, look, if Lowell were so interested in writing, then why are there so few Lowell George songs on a Lowell George solo album?
Yeah.
My contention is he wasn't healthy enough to do it, wasn't focused enough to do it. And the unfortunate thing is when he went out to tour for that album, he passed away. I think unfortunate for the music world, because I think Lowell had a shot maybe of getting back and producing. He'd already produced an album with the Grateful Dead at that point, and I know he truly loved doing that kind of work, and this was something that I encouraged him to do. And I thought, if you want to put Little Feat together again, fine, go ahead. I don't know if we ought to do that. I don't know if I want to be involved. But again, I'm jumping ahead of myself, because another album which came up after, I think, Time Loves a Hero, was the album, the last record album. Now, do you have that in front of you, John? Am I correct in that? Is that the...
It might have been a little earlier, I think, actually.
It might have been earlier.
Yeah.
So if it were earlier, then yeah, I can see why Lowell George fans in particular were freaking out, because that particular album had a lot in the way of very unusual types of songs, not only from Lowell, but from people like myself as well. I mean, there was a tune that Lowell had written called Long Distance Love, and Valerie Carter sang backgrounds with him on that. Did an absolutely beautiful job. Valerie, in fact, is on this tribute album, and did a song with Randy Newman. Valerie's also had a one record out that Lowell helped produce called Ooh Child, and the connections with this band with other people is again, I mean, it's hard to talk about Little Feat and not talk about Bonnie Raitt or Valerie Carter, Randy Newman, Van Dyke Parks. I'm drifting a little bit here, but we were at a concert in Detroit once, and we've got a very loyal following, but it's just very, very small in Detroit. And Eric Clapton came to our gig, and he got up on stage. This is the second time in like a 4-year period or whatever that he had sat in with Little Feat. And, you know, Eric just burned up the stage. And later that night, he was sitting next to a table I was at dinner. I walked over to him. I said, "Hey, I wanted to thank you for, you know, sitting in and bringing your band down." He says, "Yeah, I wanted my band to hear a proper band." I went, "Oh, okay." So high praise indeed from Eric, and that was kind of cool.
Yeah. When was it starting to become clear to you that perhaps the end was near for the band?
Well, my end was coming up towards the end of 78. I mean, the end was always near, sort of. We were living on such a precipice. There's an album cover for those in Australia that might have it, which illustrates something. It's from Neon Park. It is the album cover for Feet Don't Fail Me Now. And what we would do, we'd go and we'd individually call Neon and give them the rundown as to what the band was up to and what our psyche, how we felt about everything. So this album cover has a picture of George Washington and Marilyn Monroe in an old vehicle on a road that is neither going up or down, on a big mountain in the background with lightning bolts. And that's sort of the way our career was at that time. It was just very, very odd sort of, you know, are we climbing to the top of the precipice? Are we going downhill? What the hell are we doing? And I asked Neon, I said, what is the significance of George Washington and Marilyn Monroe? He goes, "Oh, Bill, that's riches and bitches. That's rock and roll." I went, "Oh, okay, yeah." So I said, "Well, when are we going to get those? When are we going to get the money anyway?" But I came to the end of my rope personally at the end of an album, not the end of an album, at the beginning of an album called Down on the Farm. And I had a couple, 3 days of discussions with Lowell about exactly what I felt. I needed this cathartic experience to move on. And I told him what a genius I thought he was, what a good friend I felt he had been, and what a complete punk I thought he was as well. And what an awful person he could be to people that loved him. And as a man, he sat there, took it, listened to it, realized that I really had come to a decision to move on. And I'll never forget it. He came out to my house one night, drove up on his motorcycle. I came out to talk to him. It was extremely dark out. His pupils were just jet black. He opened his mouth, could not say anything, and jumped back on his bike and sped away. And when he was trying to talk, it was almost like he was trying, like a person pleading. But again, he never got it out what he wanted to say. I know what he talked about to the other guys, which was when he got off that tour, the solo tour, that he would like to put the band back together, and that they would figure out a way to carry on, and either I would do it or not, and but they would continue on. I had no argument with that whatsoever. Fred Tackett was also on that tour with Lowell when he passed away. Fred is now working with us and was a contributor from early on. I mean, Fred played guitar on Time Loves a Hero, I think on some earlier stuff too, but he contributed a song called Fool Yourself, which was on the Dixie Chicken album, and Be One Now, which was on the album Down on the Farm. So we have a history of keeping keeping together with people. There's a long line of loyalty in a sense. As many times as we broke up, our impetus for getting back together was always the music. And I'll leave it there for a second, see what you have to say.
Sure. Do you remember where and when you were when you heard of Lowell's passing?
Yes, I was. I was in bed. Rick Harper, our road manager, called me up, and he said, "Billy, I got some bad news. Lowell passed away. His dad." And I don't know. It was one of those similar to the experience a lot of people went through the other day with the guy in excess. You sit there in a state of how could this happen? Did this happen? Did it really happen? As it slowly dawns on you that it did, this incredulity can turn to sorrow. It can also turn to anger. In my case, it turned to anger. And oddly enough, one of the first questions I had, and one of the first people I called, was the accountant. And I said, "Did Lowell have any insurance for his kids?" And they said, "No." I went, "Oh man, we got to do something." So the next call I think I made was to Linda Ronstadt, or even to Paul Barrera, let's say. And I said, "We've got to do something for Lowell's kids." And we did. We put a tribute to Lowell George at the Forum in L.A. and called in a bunch of people, Bonnie and Linda Ronstadt and Jimmy Lou, and I think some of the guys from the Doobie Brothers, and a bunch of folks to help us out. Richie Hayward, oddly enough, was in the hospital with a broken leg. His second motorcycle accident, in which he was driving out to see Lowell at Lowell's last rehearsal at this place where we had started recording down on the farm, and Richie ran straight into a rock, or side swiped a rock, which darn near took his leg off. And so he was in the hospital and was not at that tribute. You know, those are just the facts of not only where I was, but just this chaos that ensued in a way. And my way of dealing with the chaos was to say, let's put some order to it and put a tribute together.
Just skipping forward a few years and your reformation with Craig Fuller in Lowell's place, were there others in the running for the role at the time?
Well, Robert Palmer was discussed. Bonnie Raitt was discussed. I had a discussion. I had a chance to talk to Robert, in fact, about all this. It sort of bogged down a little bit in terms of how we would work it out with management. We didn't have any. He did. He had a career. We didn't. And I thought, I think Robert felt so too. Maybe we should just let this thing die a natural death. So Craig Fuller happened to call me up about a song that he and I had written a few years before. And he was curious about the publishing on it, and split and writers and all that stuff. I said, look, we're putting Little Feet back together, or at least thinking about it in earnest. Would you consider singing something? You know, trying out. So he came down, and I just thought, man, this guy is it. Let's go with it. Fred Tackett, who was also in the band, and Fred and I just got off a tour with Bob Seger. This is in 1986. I'll back up just a shade further and tell you that the way this came about was we played a room at a place called The Alley, which is in North Hollywood, a rehearsal room in which they were commemorating a room to Lowell George in part and to Little Feet. We did it. It was really cool, a great time playing with each other, although in truth it was like singing Christmas carols. We'd play like 3/4 or half or a quarter of a song and go, where are we, or how does that next lyric go, and we just couldn't remember what the hell we were doing. drove out of there with Paul, and I said, you know what, that was a fun evening. I don't know what we should do about it, but we might. Because I don't know if we should put the band back together or not. I mean, we can't play this kind of music anywhere else. And it sounds a lot like Little Feat to my ear. And he says, yeah, it does. So we thought about it. So at the tail end of Seeger's tour, we, well, actually before that, made the decision to do it. But what was going to determine whether we did it or not was what we wrote. Because everybody and their brother was putting together their bands again. And most people that were doing it didn't have material that if you were to play a song, a new song, next to an old tune, next to one of your favorite tunes, whether it was from, you know, Steely Dan or whomever, it probably wouldn't have held up. And I said, that's the criteria we've got to use. We're in competition with ourselves. We're in competition with everybody else that's out there. So, again, it's our subjective view as to whether it holds up or not. But if we think it does, the odds are a lot of other people are going to think it does too.
Did the band as a whole encounter any skepticism from critics of its ability to recapture the past glories?
Well, we certainly had a lot of criticism. And a lot of it was very interesting because it came from quarters that it surprised me. But that criticism was based, the majority of it, I'll say, was based on a feeling that without Lowell George, it wasn't Little Feat. And I know that feeling pervades in Europe, it pervades in Australia, amongst a lot of folks. And I've got no problem with that, with the exception on why they're basing it. If they base it on certain facts, like Lowell wrote and sang "Oh Atlanta," he wrote "All That You Dream," for example. The humor in the band was all Lowell's. So, well, what was Old Folks Boogie? You know, that was Paul Barrere. Yeah, Time Love's a Hero, great album. You know, thank you, Lowell. Lowell didn't hardly play on it. I mean, it's a confusion of facts. I'm not going to take anything away from Lowell George. I mean, he wrote, sang. His phrasing as a singer is something to this day that's very difficult to match. We happen to sing songs and have written songs like "Let It Roll," "Hanging On to the Good Times," "Representing the Mambo," "Texas Twister," to name a few, that absolutely hold up to anything we ever did. And it's just, I think what happens, John, is you get into a point like, say you've got a favorite Coppola film, and it doesn't matter what he did after Apocalypse Now. You're either not interested in hearing it or seeing it, or you think, how can it be as good as that? And you look at it and you go, okay, yeah. We have a tendency to dismiss things.
Okay, Bill, look, I'll have to let you go, and I thank you very much for your time and for many years of wonderful music and hopefully many more to come. And rest assured, we're certainly here, eager and waiting for that Little Feat visit.
All right, John. Well, thank you very much, okay?
And to you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.